Hello friends. Today, I want to tell you about a very important event in aviation history. It happened on April 28, 1988 at around 1 p.m. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was about to take off in Hawaii. It was a beautiful day with bright sunshine. Many people were there to enjoy their vacation in Hawaii. For those who don't know, Hawaii is a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean and is part of the United States. The capital city is Honolulu, and it's known for its stunning beaches and lush landscapes. This flight was going from Hilo to Honolulu. Hilo is located on the Big Island of Hawaii and is the most populated area in Hawaii. The flight was short, only about 35 minutes long. This was a common route for Aloha Airlines, which is a local airline that connects different islands in Hawaii. Since the distance is so short, this particular plane had already taken off 8 times that day, completing 3 round trips since the morning. For the airline, this was just another normal day. As passengers boarded, the flight doors were closed. At exactly 1:02 p.m., the plane took off smoothly into the clear sky. However, one unusual thing happened before the flight took off. A passenger noticed a small crack on the side of the plane as she was boarding. She thought this is a well-known airline, and the plane is checked regularly. It's probably nothing serious. Unfortunately, she didn't mention it to anyone, not knowing how serious that small crack would later become. Just 10 to 15 minutes after takeoff, the flight attendants started serving drinks. The seatbelt sign was still on because the plane had not yet reached its cruising altitude. For this flight, cruising altitude was 24,000 feet. There were 3 flight attendants on board, and they were busy serving passengers. Exactly 20 minutes after takeoff, the plane reached that cruising height. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. All the passengers heard it. The plane started to shake violently, and everyone felt the sudden change in pressure. Breathing became difficult, and luggage flew around the cabin. There was chaos everywhere. Passengers looked around in shock and horror. The ceiling and walls of the plane were missing, and above them, they could see the open sky. What had happened? A large section, about 35 square meters, had torn away from the front of the plane. Inside an airplane, the cabin is usually pressurized so that people can breathe normally. At 24,000 feet, the outside air pressure is very low, making it hard to breathe without proper equipment. Airplanes have systems to keep the air pressure inside the cabin stable. If something goes wrong with this system, oxygen masks drop down for passengers to use. You might have heard about this during safety briefings. They always say if the cabin pressure drops, oxygen masks will drop down. Typically, these oxygen masks provide air for about 15 to 20 minutes. During that time, the pilot needs to bring the plane down to a lower altitude where breathing is easier, usually below 10,000 feet. In the case of Flight 243, the oxygen masks dropped down, but they didn't work because the explosion had damaged the system. People began to feel dizzy and confused. They were losing consciousness quickly, within just a minute or two. One flight attendant, Michelle Honda, who was near row 15, tried to call the cockpit using the intercom, but there was no answer. Another flight attendant, C.B. Lensing, was serving drinks near row 5 when the roof of the plane was blown away and she was thrown into the air. The third flight attendant, Jen Sato, was near row 2 when a piece of luggage hit her in the face, causing her to fall to the ground. The scene was chaotic. With no response from the pilots, Michelle crawled along the floor, asking passengers, "Do you know how to fly a plane?" Her questions made everyone even more scared. Passengers began to think, if she's asking us what has happened to the pilots. Crawling to the cockpit, she saw blood coming from Jen's head and tried to peek inside, but the view was blocked by debris. A few minutes passed, and the passengers were in danger of losing consciousness. Outside, the winds were blowing at almost 500 kilometers per hour, and the temperature was 45 degrees Celsius. Most passengers were wearing shorts and t-shirts, not prepared for such cold weather. The only flight attendant who remained conscious, Michelle, continued to try to contact the pilots, but received no response. But here is where the story takes a turn for the better. The pilots were alive and in much better condition than the passengers. Captain Robert Sean's Thiem, aged 44, was an experienced pilot who had been with Aloha Airlines for 11 years. His first officer, Mimi Tompkins, was 36 years old. When the explosion happened, both pilots were shocked. They quickly put on their oxygen masks and started to figure out what to do. They decided to make an emergency descent. They began to lower the plane quickly at about 4,100 feet per minute. However, another problem arose. The plane's nose had dropped down by about 1 meter due to the damage. The only thing connecting the cockpit and the cabin was the plane's undercarriage. If they kept flying like this, the two sections could separate completely. Mimi contacted air traffic control in Honolulu. "Forget about landing in Honolulu. We need to land in Maui. It's closer," she said. At 1:08 p.m., she contacted the Maui Tower and explained the situation. It had been about 3 minutes since the roof blew off, and thankfully they had descended to 14,000 feet. At this height, breathing was easier for most passengers, so many avoided losing consciousness. Mimi warned Maui Airport to have emergency services ready. Firefighters and rescue vehicles lined up on the runway, preparing for the worst. A minute later, the plane was at 10,000 feet. However, another problem emerged. There was a tall mountain, Haiku Kalai summit, directly between the plane and the airport. Captain Roberts slowed the plane down, reducing speed to avoid the mountain while still making his way toward the airport. Passengers started to feel a sense of relief as they realized there was a pilot flying the plane. As the plane descended towards the runway, Mimi tried to lower the landing gear. There should be 3 sets of wheels, 2 at the back and 1 at the front. The rear wheels were successfully deployed, but the front wheel would not come down. Landing without the front wheel is possible, but it can be dangerous, especially in the condition of this plane. If they tried to land without it, the nose could break and cause a severe crash, possibly leading to a fire or explosion. With no other options, the pilots prepared for a belly landing, knowing it could be risky. As they approached the runway, passengers braced themselves. Some prayed while others held on to friends, thinking this might be their last moments. Fear filled the cabin, and it was justified given the circumstances. As the plane got closer to the ground, it began to sway from side to side. The pilots realized that the left engine had failed. They tried to restart it, but it wouldn't work. Emergency services were still waiting on the runway, ready for any situation. At 1:05 p.m., the pilots informed the tower that they needed all available equipment. Then a person on the runway watching through binoculars saw that the front landing gear had finally released. This news relieved the pilots, knowing they wouldn't have to attempt a belly landing. Exactly 13 minutes and 42 seconds after the roof blew off, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 touched down safely on the runway. The captain used the brakes and the thrust reverser from the working engine to slow down. The plane came to a stop without any explosions. Emergency teams felt a wave of relief as they prepared to help. Passengers exited through emergency exits, and many were grateful to be alive. A video captured the moment, showing people sliding down the emergency chutes. They thanked and applauded the captain for his heroic actions. However, not everyone came out unscathed. Some passengers were injured. An 84-year-old woman in seat 5 has suffered a skull fracture. Another passenger in seat 6A had a broken arm, and several others in rows 4, 5, 6, and 7 sustained serious injuries because the roof had blown off above them. Fortunately, many passengers were only slightly hurt, and some were completely unharmed. Flight attendant Jen was unconscious, suffering from a concussion. Tragically, C.B. Lensing, another flight attendant, lost her life that day. Search teams tried to find her body, but it was never recovered. In total, 94 people survived this harrowing experience. Was it just luck that they survived? No, much of the credit goes to seatbelts. Since the flight hadn't reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign was still on, and everyone had their seatbelts fastened. If the passengers hadn't been strapped in, many could have been thrown from the plane. News of the incident spread quickly, and photos of the plane without a roof appeared in newspapers worldwide. It was dubbed the Miracle Flight. The National Transportation Safety Board sent a team to investigate what went wrong. They discovered that the plane had completed 8,968 flight cycles and 3,549 flight hours. The plane's fuselage or main body had weakened over time due to metal fatigue and corrosion. The structure of the plane meant that the metal panels expanded when flying and contracted when on the ground. This constant movement caused stress and weakened the materials. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, and its body was made of thin aluminum sheets. Boeing used a special bonding process to hold these sheets together. However, they discovered that the older method was not as effective, especially in humid conditions. In 1972, Boeing started using a new hot bonding method, but unfortunately Flight 243 was still using the old techniques. The investigation found that the management of Aloha Airlines had not properly supervised maintenance. They failed to inspect the planes thoroughly, even after warnings from Boeing about the potential risks of old aircraft. The FAA also faced criticism for not enforcing proper inspections. Aloha claimed to have used new methods to check for cracks, but it turned out they had not conducted adequate inspections. The NTSB's final report listed three main reasons for the accident. First, Aloha Airlines did not follow proper maintenance protocols. Second, the FAA failed to ensure that all joints were inspected. Third, both Boeing and the FAA took the risks lightly when the issues were first reported. As a result of this incident, many older planes underwent re-inspection, and several were found to have similar cracks. Following this event, aviation safety standards were significantly improved worldwide. In 1991, the FAA launched the Aging Aircraft Safety Program, requiring regular inspections for older aircraft. New technologies for detecting cracks like eddy current and ultrasonic testing were adopted. The frequency of inspections for high-cycle planes increased, ensuring better safety measures for flights with many short journeys. Overall, the events of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 led to major changes in aviation safety. Thankfully, since then, no incidents of this magnitude have occurred. While advancements in aviation technology continue, it's crucial to remember the lessons learned from past accidents to ensure the safety of all passengers. Thank you for listening.